So tell our listeners what you think that the biggest obstacle, if we were to look at the potential barriers that somebody has standing in their way of a person's true and complete happiness. What do you think they are?
I think one of the biggest obstacles for us reaching happiness is not a lack of knowledge. I think we oftentimes know the things that can make us happy, but I think we don't do those things. And I think that that's one of the most frustrating parts as a researcher is that we can provide information, but information alone doesn't cause transformation. You can read 100 books, self-help books on meditation, and never attempt meditation at all. You can say, well, that's a great idea. I know a lot about meditation, but you've never actually experienced any of the cathartic effects or the ways that it retrains the brain. What we're attempting to do in positive psychology is study how do we get over that barrier? How do we get from knowing what we should do to actually doing it? And I think that the biggest challenge to that is something we call activation energy. Not only is it a challenge, I think it's actually the key to us being able to do the things we really want to do. So, activation energy is the energy it takes to start a task. In chemistry and physics back in high school, if you can remember back to those days, you know that activation energy is the energy it takes to start a chain reaction, to catalyze a reaction. Once you've got that initial investment of energy, which is at the highest point at the beginning of the formula, then the rest of the formula can continue. The same is true with us. If you want to catalyze a reaction in your life, if you want to create a change in your life, in terms of your happiness or your success rates, there's an initial investment of energy, which is at the highest point at the beginning of the formula. It's the reason why we procrastinate. We procrastinate because we wait for our stress level to crest up higher than the energy it takes to start the task. It also means that it often takes more mental energy to start the task than actually to do the task. Now, here's the exciting part. What we discovered is that if you slightly change that activation energy up or down, you can make it significantly easier to stop negative habits and to start positive ones. So, for example, I was watching too much television. And what I was finding was that every day I'd come home from work and I'd be tired, and it would be very easy, low activation energy, to press the on button on my remote control. So I just took a stopwatch, walked my batteries out of the remote control, walked them 20 seconds away to my bedroom, and left the batteries there. I then came home for the next couple of days from work, sat down on the couch, forgot that I had taken the batteries out, so I pressed the on button, got frustrated, and my brain says, well, why don't we just go get the batteries and we could start watching TV? And my brain says, no, it takes forever to go get those batteries. Let's do something else. What I'd done was I had magnified in my brain the distance between starting the activity and doing the activity. I increased the activation energy. And suddenly my brain didn't want to do that. The path of least resistance led away from television and towards things that were closer. So I put work I needed to do on one side of the sofa. The other side, I had a book that I've always wanted to read that was on my shelf. I had even told people I'd read this book. So I had it there so I could read. I had a journal open so I could journal. I had a guitar within reach. So what I did was I made it significantly easier to do the things that I wanted to do, the things that are easier. So what we're doing there is we're manipulating the energy it takes to start a task. That just means changing your environment and being conscious about it. So, for example, I wanted to start exercising in the morning. And I knew exercise would raise your IQ at work. I knew it's the equivalent of taking an antidepressant. But every morning, information is not transformation. So what I did one night, after trying this for about 1.5 years to get myself to exercise, I just moved my athletic shoes right next to my bed. So I lowered the activation energy in the morning. And I put a workout routine on the wall so I wouldn't argue with myself. And I just went to sleep in my gym clothes for a period of just 21 days, which is how long it takes to create a habit. And what I found was just by making it slightly easier in the morning, it was maybe easier by even just 20 seconds in the morning. What we find is that was enough for my brain to start tipping towards doing those positive habits. So I think what it is not necessarily just learning about what causes us to be happy. I think it's learning about how we can actually do those things. So look around at your life. Think about the things you know would make you happier and more successful, and find some way of making it easier to do those and harder to do the things that are the negative habits. And in doing so, you can change your environment to work for you.
Yeah, this is a principle that I talk about in my book, The Compound Effect, as well, is you're taking advantage of the lazy factor. I mean, ultimately, we are lazy. And marketers know that, grocery store designers know that, internet marketers know that, email opt-out, processes know that, and they take advantage of our, being lazy, but we can also use that to benefit ourselves. And what you're talking about is, making it lazy or difficult to get the TV to turn on, putting a lock on your refrigerator that you have to do the combo with, burying your email startup button on your computer, a variety of things that if it takes too much effort, you might actually stop breaking the unconscious pattern of doing these bad habits and make it easy for you to start doing the positive habits, which you call this activation energy, which is a great idea. And then you also are hitting on one of the biggest things that frustrate me about personal development or human behavior, and it is this, that knowledge is not power. You can know what to do and not do it, and it's the same as not knowing what to do. Ideas without execution is insanity. So, it is this transference of knowing what to do and then actually doing it. That is the greatest separator I have found between those that end up becoming super achievers and those that end up living mediocre or average lives. It's not that they don't know the same things, both groups of people. It is just the super achievers do and act on what they know versus the ones that have average and mediocre lives. That's the great distinction between achievement and unfortunate, unhappiness, mediocrity, and what have you, is the actual doing of the thing that you know. So I appreciate you hitting on that. Now, how do you think fear affects our daily happiness? When you think about fear, how does that interrupt and affect our daily happiness? Around that topic, what would be some of your views on fear?
Well, my favorite topic is the brain. And what happens to your brain when you're afraid is remarkable. If you put somebody into a brain scan and you have them think about a financial decision or a decision about work or a decision about their family, the front part of their brain lights up. It's their prefrontal cortex. That's the part that's discernment and judgment and good decision making and thinking. That part's active, and that's pretty much the only part that's active. But if you show somebody a down ticker for like a stock market, a little down red arrow, or you give them some negative information, or you make them fearful for just a moment, that anxiety or that fear lights up part of their brain called the limbic system, or the amygdala starts to light up. And in those cases, what you see on the brain scan is you see a war happening in the brain. You can actually see those fear centers, the anxiety parts of your brain, starting to increase in their activation. And when that happens, the front part of your brain, that part that makes those good decisions, the part that causes you to be successful, that part actually starts to shrink in terms of its activation. You actually see the energy being used by the wrong parts of the brain. It's what we call an emotional hijack. It's where the parts of your brain that are fearful and anxious take over and cause you to make bad financial decisions, cause you to make bad career decisions, bad family decisions. What we're attempting to get somebody to do when they feel fear like that is to regain control. Control is the way that we actually get over our senses of fear. Control and optimism. Optimism is the belief that our behavior will matter, which means that while we might feel anxious in the present moment, that doesn't have to be permanent. We can make those changes in the future based upon our behavior. What we have somebody do when they feel fear or they feel anxiety is, first of all, to verbalize it. As soon as you verbalize it, what you do is you take the part of your brain, which is the verbalization part, and start to light that up, which takes away resources from the part that's just feeling overwhelmed and fearful. And then what I have people do is to write down a list of the things that they're stressed about, why they feel overwhelmed during the day, why they feel anxious or fearful. And once they write those down, I have them split them into two different categories. The first is the things that are outside of their control. I don't control market forces. I don't control how much information comes to me from senior leadership at a company. I don't control what teachers are going to give my children on grades at school. If those are the fears that an individual have, those are outside of their control. So by definition, all of the resources your brain expends on those things doesn't move you forward. It's wasted energy by definition. So the other side of the category is I have them find things that are within their control. And, we've taken these ideas from things like Alcoholics Anonymous, which tell you to have the wisdom to discern what's within your control and what's outside of your control. If you get your brain to focus on something that's within your control, something that if you could take one concrete action, you could decrease your stress. As soon as you have that, your brain starts focusing its resources on how to do that concrete action. And you can see in the brain the war being won by the right part. You actually see the front part of the brain starting to light up more as it strategizes how to move forward, and it quiets that part of the brain That's the fear and the anxiety which holds individuals back.
Explain the line, happiness is not just a mood, it is a work ethic.
I think we think that happiness is something we'll find, or that if we reach those sales targets or we get through this economic crisis, then we'll be happy. Turns out our brains don't work that way. Happiness isn't something you find. And just having those successes, we merely change what our sales target is for the next quarter, and then our brain focuses upon that. Happiness itself is a work ethic. It requires us to train our brains like athletes to increase our abilities of being more optimistic so that when challenge comes, our brains are working at their optimal level. If we see happiness as a work ethic, we don't wait passively for it to happen to us based upon the happenstance of external events. If I know the externals of an individual, if I know all of the money that they're paid, what clothes they wear, what shoes they're wearing, what cars they drive, what buildings they're in, I can only predict 10% of their long-term happiness as a scientist. 90% of their happiness is a mystery because 90% of your happiness, long-term, has nothing to do with your external world and everything to do with how your brain perceives the world. So if 90% of your happiness is within your control, then what I suggest people to start to do is to work towards it. We work for our education. We work for greater sales. My question is, what are you doing to work on your happiness? And if you build up your work ethic in that domain, we see the happiness advantage start to be reaped in people's lives.